This episode contains explicit language. Welcome to Mom and Dad Are Fighting, Slate's parenting podcast for Thursday, September 14th, the Growing Up in Public edition. I'm Elizabeth Newcamp. I write the homeschool and family travel blog, Dutch Goose. I'm the mom of 3 littles, Henry, who's 11, Oliver, who's 9, and Teddy, who's 6. We live in Tokyo, Japan.
I'm Zak Rosen. I make another podcast. It's called The Best Advice Show. And I am dad to Noah, who's 6, and Ami, who's going to be 3 this week. We live in Detroit.
I'm Jamilah Lemieux. I'm a writer, contributor to Slate's Care and Feeding parenting column, and mom to Naima, who's 10, and we live in Los Angeles.
Well, you guys, I'm super excited about today's show. I'm talking with Devorah Haitner, who wrote the eye-opening book, Growing Up in Public. It delves into the intricate world of social media and how it's impacting our kids. I'm sure many of you, just like me, are feeling a bit perplexed about how to help kids navigate this digital landscape. Well, Devorah is here to help us find our way. So whether you're a parent, a guardian, an educator, or just curious about the influence of social media, this is a segment you're not going to want to miss. But before that, of course, we are going to share some stories from our week in parenting. And then if you're in the Slate Plus Club, we will debrief our interview with Devorah and talk about our own experience parenting young digital citizens. Here's what you'll hear if you have Slate Plus.
I did appreciate the note about letting your kids know that you're tracking them, which is something, Naima tends to forget. And so I'll pick her phone up in front of her and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm about to read out your text messages, girl."
Yeah, and another thing that your conversation made me think of is this constant refrain that we're hearing from Noah, which is like, "Why do you guys get to be on your phones and I don't get a phone?" And I'm like, "Good point." And then I put it down.
As a Slate Plus member, you'll get a whole bonus segment every week and all your favorite Slate podcasts ad-free. It's truly the best way to listen and the best way to support the show. You can sign up for Slate Plus now at slate.com/momanddadplus. All right, we're going to jump into triumphs and fails as soon as we get back from this short break. This episode is brought to you by KiwiCo. Some of my favorite family memories are when we're all doing something together, where the kids and I have equal experience. Like maybe I'm slightly better at reading the directions, but largely none of us know what we're doing. Well, each month, KiwiCo can deliver a crate packed with fun and sparks of creativity with kid-friendly topics and activities. Henry recently got a kit where he built a foaming hand soap dispenser, and it involved all different kinds of parts and using real tools. But what I love about it is it sits in our bathroom now. I also love that the booklets come with sort of other things you can do. So there's always these extension projects because Henry's getting faster and faster at being able to build these things. So now there's other projects and skills we can learn from that project. Redefine learning with play. Explore hands-on projects that build creative confidence and problem-solving skills with KiwiCo. You can get 50% off your first month plus free shipping on any crate line at kiwico.com/momanddad. That's 50% off your first month at kiwico.com/momanddad.
Wait, are you gaming? On a Chromebook?
Yep. It's got a high-res 120Hz display, plus this killer RGB keyboard. And I can access thousands of games anytime, anywhere.
Stop playing.
What?
Get out of here.
Huh?
Yeah, I want you to stop playing and get out of here so I can game on that Chromebook.
Got it.
Discover the ultimate cloud gaming machine, a new kind of Chromebook.
Okay, Jamilah, what have you been up to this week?
Starting off the week with a fail. Yesterday, I got up. I haven't been sleeping well lately. I feel like I'm only getting an hour or 2 of sleep per night. Even
Oh my God.
Oh no.
I just toss and turn and I don't fall asleep. And I take a sleeping pill and it's not working. And it's been going on for about 5 or 6 days now. So it's not good. So anyway, I go to wake Naima up and I try to wake her up. And she won't wake up. And so I said, you know what? I mean, she's breathing, but she's not.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yes, but she's not waking up. Oh. And I said, okay. And I went back to bed.
Yeah.
I was just so exhausted, and she was sniffling and not feeling well the night before. And I was like, well, she's sick. We're just having a sick day, you know. And when she finally did get up, she was still sniffling and not feeling so great. And we took a COVID test, but it was negative. And I feel like Naima could have went to school, but I was just so tired.
Totally. Did you go to bed after you decided that it was going to be a sick day?
Yes.
You were able to get some sleep then?
I got some rest. I wouldn't say I fell asleep, but I rested.
What's going on? Is it deadline woes?
I don't know what it is.
Do you feel like your mind can't shut off, or you're just like laying in bed, just the sleep is not coming?
The sleep is just not coming,
Oh.
you know? Like, my mind is shutting down. Like, I'm not, like, my thoughts aren't racing, you know?
Yeah.
I'm just like, here I am.
That's the worst. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that sucks. But this was Naima's second week of school?
Third,
Okay.
maybe
All right.
fourth. This is the fourth week of school.
Now we're just in that school. I feel the same way. I'm like, we've
just-
just started,
We're just in it now. Yeah.
but yet maybe we're a month in.
Is she feeling better now?
She is.
Okay, good.
Good. Zach, how's your week?
My week is going all right. In fact, we had a great weekend because we had a wedding. I love a wedding, and it was a camp wedding in which no kids were invited. And so we had to get some coverage. And as you know, we have grandparents galore here, thank goodness. And so Shira and I got to spend 2 nights away from the kids at this beautiful camp in northern Michigan, hanging with friends, doing archery. I hadn't done archery since the mid-90s. It's as fun as I remember. The kids were well taken care of by Shira's folks one night, and then my dad and stepmom the second night. And it was so nice. And I don't know about you all, but the thing that I love about weddings the most is the speeches. And there were some really good speeches, especially from the bride's mom. And it was just like, if you can muster up the composure and creativity to like make a beautiful speech for your child, like it seems like just like a peak parenting. Talk about triumphs. Like, this is like, I bet she's been taking notes on this for years and years, the mother of the bride. And it was just not a dry eye in the house. It made me think about, you know, my kids maybe one day getting married, and it was just a love fest. So couldn't ask for anything more from the wedding. The kids listened to my parents. We learned that they go to bed easier for the parents than they do for us, because Ami's been such a pain in the ass at night lately. But he listened for them and went to sleep at a reasonable hour, and it was a triumph.
That's a huge triumph.
Yeah.
And a camp wedding, that sounds so fun.
So fun. And
I
like,
haven't done a camp like,
oh my God.
were you in like cabins?
Yes.
There?
We were in a
Oh my
cabin.
gosh.
We went swimming in the lake. Shira did arts and crafts. And this
I
thing
love
about
this.
the no kids allowed, like I felt bad for some of our friends who have kids who don't have grandparents in the area because they had to pay like an arm and a leg to get coverage, you know, to pay a babysitter for
Yeah.
overnight.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about those economics, but I mean, what would you guess it costs for a babysitter to take care of 2 young kids for 48 hours?
I can't even think about it because it's so well, the overnight is so expensive. I don't know. Just tell me.
$400.
$900
Yeah.
is what they
What?
charged, because they're still what they did was they charged like their regular babysitting rate of $20 an hour plus an overnight of like, I don't know, $12-13 an hour or something to sleep. So they were getting paid to sleep. But I mean, this was like, you know, the groom, one of the groom's best friends, so he wasn't gonna miss it. But I felt awful. Like, man, that's quite a premium to pay.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what people do who aren't lucky enough to have free childcare. So, man, $900. What's going on with you, Elizabeth?
I'm taking a triumph because this weekend I went away without the kids, without Jeff. I signed up for a yoga retreat before we even got here. A friend I met on Facebook hooked me up with this group, and I saw on their page, they have like a WhatsApp group for people in Tokyo. It's all English, speaking, and people ask questions on there. And someone had posted on there this yoga retreat, and I kind of hemmed and hawed about it, and a bunch of my friends were like, just sign up for it, just sign up for it. So I was like, okay. So I signed up before I even got here and knew no one and showed up Friday, and there was a typhoon hitting. And so as we are like leaving Tokyo, so we went in like 3 cars with these women I don't know, and we drove through this typhoon to get to a house on the beach. It was supposed to be like an hour drive. Wow. It ended up being like 4.5 hours.
Oh my
Roads
God.
were closing. But you know what, guys? I forged some friendships through fire. There is nothing like speaking no Japanese in a car when roads are closed and landslides are happening, to just really be like, this is all we have. It was amazing, though. And then we, got to the house. We did yoga. Someone cooked. These were all people that wanted the same. Like, I think just by having this be this kind of retreat where we were doing yoga and we were journaling and getting to talk about, being here in Tokyo, was sort of like already this kind of down select of people who were interested in kind of the same things.
Yeah.
And so it was really nice. I mean, my goal was sort of like, okay, I'm going to leave here with 2 phone numbers, and ended up kind of this whole group is still chatting and sharing things and sharing book recommendations and places to go. So it was really great.
Do they all live in Tokyo?
They all live in Tokyo.
Great.
They're all like from all kinds of backgrounds, just they all speak English, I would say, is the people from embassies, jobs, different things around here. It was really great. The kids were totally fine. And because of the typhoon, I literally could not speak to Jeff. Like I was able to squeak out a few like emails to be like, hey, I'm safe. But didn't talk to the kids, didn't talk to Jeff, was just sort of like, it's going to be fine. Everybody was fine. Jeff sent Henry to the grocery store by himself, and he did the grocery shopping. Like, I feel like without me here, it was really good. And I came back feeling very, very renewed, which was great.
Good for you.
And it was fine. It was great. I should go again.
Yes, you absolutely should.
I know. Well, on that note, we are going to take another quick break. And when we get back, we will be joined by Devorah Haitner.
As a parent, you want to set your kid up for success. K-12 can help your child start reaching their full potential in life now, with online education options tailored to their unique needs, interests, and schedules. And there's still time to get started this year. K-12 powered schools are tuition-free, online accredited public schools for kindergarten through 12th grade. This is not your typical homeschooling where parents are responsible for teaching their children. K-12 powered schools have state-certified teachers trained in online education. And there's an online portal that gives parents daily insights into curriculum and performance. K-12's hands-on innovation technology makes learning interactive and engaging, helping your child gain skills, experience, and certifications, all before graduating high school. Help your child gain the skills they need to thrive in the future with K-12. There's still time to get started for the fall. Go to k12.com/momanddad today to learn more and find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you. That's the letter K, the number 12.com/momanddad. K12.com/momanddad.
From 20th Century Studios and New Regency, The Creator, only in theaters September 29th.
Like it or not, humankind will end.
We should never have let AI out of the box.
From the director of Rogue One.
Did you locate the weapon?
This can't be right.
She's just a kid.
My name is Alfie. You're my friend?
She dies with the rest of them.
I can't do that.
The Creator. Experience the movie event only in theaters September 29th. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Get tickets now.
Experiences are what people love most about travel. With Viator, you can browse and book tours and activities so incredible you'll want to tell your friends. They offer everything from simple tours to extreme adventures and all the niche, interesting stuff in between. Viator has experiences in over 190 countries. There's something for everyone. Plus, Viator's travel experiences have millions of real traveler reviews, so you have the information you need to book the best activities for your trip. Viator lets you keep things flexible. Use Reserve Now and Pay Later to secure the activities you don't want to miss without being locked in. Whether you want to take a backstage tour of the Grand Ole Opry, a Miami Bimini Bahamas day trip by ferry, or a private guided tour of the Grand Canyon, Viator is for you. Download the Viator app now and use Viator 10 for 10% off your first booking. One app, over 300,000 experiences you'll remember. Do more with Viator.
We're back, and I'm now joined by Devorah Haitner. Devorah has been talking with kids about how they use social media for a long time, and she also helps grown-ups worry less and mentor kids better within these spaces. Her first book was called Screenwise, and her most recent is called Growing Up in Public. I hope you enjoy this interview, and we'll catch you on the other side.
So like when I go out and speak, a lot of folks would come up to me and say, thank you so much. This is so empowering. I'm going to talk to my kids so differently about tech and think about my own tech use and how I'm modeling. But I'm still so glad that my middle school years, high school years, and yes, even college years were not shared on social media. What do you got for that, Devorah? Yeah. Because that's nuts. And none of us really would want those years, shared in perpetuity and being able to be screenshot and, used against us, right?
Right. I really appreciate that as an elder millennial, like all of my AIM messages that I would have out there. And like when those kind of pop back up on things, I'm like, oh, yikes. But then imagining that with pictures and videos and all of this other information out there. Your book, Growing Up in Public, is designed, at least in what I took away, like to empower families to make their own rules and decisions for keeping kids safe online. And there isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution, which I think is sort of disappointing for a lot of parents. We get a lot of letters like, well, what exactly can we do? Can you talk a little bit about the factors we should be looking at to make this plan with our families about how we are approaching kind of all of this digital stuff with them?
Well, we want to start about thinking about our own modeling. We want to think about what we're sharing about our kids, asking permission if we are sharing our kids on social media. Also making sure that we're talking with kids about just communication decisions. If we're texting someone and it's getting stressful or tense, this is why we might want to switch to a phone call. And we want to actually talk kids through that because they're just watching us kind of like thumb out our lives in front of them, but they're not learning very much they're not learning from our wisdom, frankly, and our experience. So one of the things we can do is just make sure we talk about that. Another thing we can do is help kids learn to problem solve situations, ideally before they come up. But the reality is sometimes it's going to be afterwards, and we're going to be, helping them do that postmortem. But thinking about, okay, what are you going to do if you're on a group text, and everybody's like, let's start a new group text, without this person? Or what are you going to do if everyone starts talking in a mean way about, somebody on the text, somebody off the text? What are the ways you could respond? And helping kids kind of be ready for some of the more common scenarios. How will you help yourself feel better if you feel left out because of something you see online? So many of these experiences are almost universal. And so rather than, wait for them to happen, we can kind of anticipate at least a few of the main ones and work on them before our kids even have phones.
And it seems like some of that conversation, like you just said, needs to happen even earlier than we think about it happening. Because it seems like there's this zone where the kids are still like they're capable of understanding this, but still view us as someone who might provide guidance versus like if we don't start approaching this until they are teens and now they have this phone. So do you have some tips on how we can be introducing these to younger kids? I mean, are you literally talking about just saying, to your 8-year-old, your 9-year-old, even younger than that? Or should we be saying like, these are the situations that are happening to me? Are we role playing at that age? Like, how do those conversations start?
A lot of it is also looking at what goes on with your kid in person, or a lot of 8 and 9-year-olds are on Roblox or Minecraft or interacting in other digital communities. Some kids have phones at that age too, by the way.
Yeah.
So, because I'm going out to schools and I'm, the age seems to go down like every day. Like I'll be in a 4th grade and, a bunch of kids will have phones. So, but even if they're not using personal devices like a phone, they're definitely communicating via these shared communities like Roblox, or they're in the school Google Doc and they're using that to talk to everyone in the 3rd grade or whatever. So I think it is younger than we think that we need to talk about these things, but you can see where your kid is strong and where they're doing well and where they're struggling. You can see if they're having trouble with turn taking or getting too mad when they game. And that doesn't mean your kid shouldn't game anymore, but it may mean that like a certain amount is good to build frustration tolerance and then they need a break. Or it may be that certain games aren't a fit for them if they're going to nuke all their friendships, right? So we really want to look at, how is my kid doing at this stuff? What are the areas where they struggle? Do you have a kid who is a real people pleaser and will just say yes to giving anyone their contact information? That's a kid who may need to work on boundaries. Do you have a kid who is super competitive when they game and they may need to work on, how to relate to people when they game so they, again, don't, disrupt their friendships? So there's so many, issues depending on your kid's personality and what they're drawn to.
It seems to me that privacy is kind of at the heart of this problem, right? Because when we are using these devices, there's this idea that maybe it's private or it's personal. I think so many of us are afraid of these bad things happening and our kids either not coming to us or us not knowing, right? Like now we have the ability to know all the stuff we want to know, all the things. But we don't necessarily think through like what we're going to do when it happens. So, I mean, I was thinking as I was reading the book, like in the situation where you're geo-tracking your kid, maybe they know, but then you notice they're at an address that you didn't, you don't know, and you didn't know they were going there. It's like, okay, well, now you know, what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And I mean, one of the stories I wrote about in the book was a mom who figured out that her kid was probably in a romantic relationship. And it's like, well, do you want to just like maybe wait for him to tell you that? Like, do you want to know? Like, there are reasons people keep relationships private early on, and that may not be the situation. Like, but it doesn't mean something dire. Like your kid visiting someone new, for example, doesn't mean they're going to that house to buy drugs, for example. Like there's probably a lot of other good explanations. So unless you have other evidence, I mean, yeah, if your kid's also like sleeping through school and, has red eyes or has, there's a bunch of things going on that are telling you like, oh, my kid is, using drugs, or my kid is abusing alcohol, or my kid is abusing prescription meds. Like, of course you want to intervene and find out what's going on, and get them some support and help. But like knowing that they've gone to a new address, that is not in and of itself concerning.
Right. Like I almost thought of it as like, do you have probable cause to use this thing that you have? Like you have this tool. Should you be using it? And I mean, this whole discussion, the mentoring over monitoring, goes back to this larger idea you have, which is like everything we're doing in parenting should be in pursuit of like preparing our kids for adulthood. And so how does this play into that, right? Like how we help their monitor their digital stuff or choose not to monitor, how does that play into the life skills we hope that they have?
Right. Because you'll probably still be paying their phone bill in college, but hopefully you're not tracking their location. But I talked to parents who were tracking their kids' location in college and thinking like their kid skipped class. I'm like, well, maybe they left their phone in the dorm room and just went to class without their phone. But if they are skipping class, again, is that something you need to know? And I think a lot of parents just don't think about like how incredibly invasive it is to be keeping, essentially an ankle bracelet on your kid, and how little that's preparing them to be independent. I mean, just yesterday, my kid was at an amusement park, and I dropped off and other parents were picking up. And I knew he was kind of probably going to be there longer than he wanted to, because I knew he was going to get outvoted by the friends who wanted to stay till close. And I was like, I could hover, in this other place an hour away from my house and just like wait for him to be done and like whisk him away the second he's ready to go. But that's not realistic. That's not real life. Real life is like, okay, well, our ride is coming in a couple hours. So what do I do with myself? I'm kind of done going on roller coasters. What do I do with myself until I have a ride home?
I was struck too by like, you talk a lot about not fixing their problems. Like we have this opportunity, or I guess if you look at the use of social media, texting, all that kind of the digital stuff as an opportunity to help them get through these challenges that we know we're going to have as adults, right? Like we have these friendship things. We text a friend in anger about our spouse or about our partner, right? And it's not that we couldn't have our partner see that, but it is, we were letting off steam, like these sort of things. And using this as an opportunity for, like you said, for them to make mistakes or come to us. And that's part of that mentoring, right? To be there when they fall and help them get back through it.
And I love that example, though, because they may do that about you. And I wrote about this in growing up in public where, your kid may be on vacation, like kind of fronting to their friends about what a crummy time they're having. They may actually be having a good time every other minute. I mean, those of us who've traveled with teenagers, like they may be actually, and it may be their fault that the trip is crummy too, because they may be being such pills that it's difficult to, enjoy. But generally, they're probably having fun, but maybe it's just not cool to admit to your friends, because you want your friends to know you miss them and how much they're valued. And so in that conversation, as a teenager, you're going to be like, oh, I so wish I wasn't in Paris with my dumb parents, even though they might actually really have dug some experience they just had in Paris or, whatever, New York City or wherever you're with them. But they're going to be like, to their friends, like, oh, this is such a drag. I wish I was back with you all, and if you see that, you might be like, this is a stake through my heart. I saved up for 5 years for this trip. I always wanted to take my teenager here, but that wasn't for you.
Yeah.
And even more so if they're actually legitimately like mad at you and trying to work something out and saying like, oh, I'm in a big fight with my mom, whatever. And again, they're going to represent their side of the story. And if you read that, that's not necessarily going to be helpful. Just like when I was walking home from middle school and my friend said, I hate my mother. And I was like, oh, I think I do too. Like, and I didn't even know, like, it was such an earth-shattering moment because I didn't know you could say that out loud. But I think for me, at least in that moment, I really felt that and believed that, but it wasn't that like an ongoing feeling. I mean, I know adults who are estranged from their parents, right? Like for someone that might be like a realization of something but for me, it was like a very momentary, my mother and I had a very rocky, stormy relationship, and especially in those years. And I think it's important for kids to have the space to talk with their friends and for us to not be on the inside of that. I don't need to know if my kid is complaining about me and saying, oh, it's so burdensome to have a mother who writes about screen time and I feel like she overthinks everything. And, can I just, get on Discord? Like, why is my mom such an overthinker about this? And she talks about it so much. She thinks about it all the time. Like if that, like I happen to know that my kid does find that to be a pain in the neck. But, if he wants to complain to his friends about it, like, that's fine. I don't need to read that. Just like, again, if you're complaining about your kid and you had a rough day with them or whatever, like that's where you might not want to share it on social media, but maybe that is a text to your sister or something, or like a best friend or a therapist, not a public social post that your kid could later see. Because I do think that's not necessarily a great thing.
Oh, right. Yeah. I was just thinking about like when I was reading this about how if you're reading every text, how easy it would be to lose the context of like, this is them complaining and go to your head like, well, they're so rude and they're so ungrateful. And now I want to take their phone because they're doing this, as opposed to, like you said, viewing this as like, this is a healthy way for them to deal with this. And thank goodness they're doing this instead of screaming at me, when they come through the door. Like, wouldn't you rather them shoot something off to a friend that they have a relationship with and the friend could be like, yeah, that's the worst, right? And then they can come through the door and still be like, thanks for dinner, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like on a good day.
Yeah, on a good day. Or just ignore you.
And we know that humans find community through complaint and kvetching and all of that. And I mean, I've learned, in my like almost 50 years that like, in fact, kvetching sometimes brings me down, but that was like, had to be my own realization. But I think in general, a lot of teenagers, do kind of complain and co-regulate jointly by like, oh, school sucks, life sucks, whatever. And I think that's really a part of the rite of passage of being a teenager. And again, as a parent, the tricky thing is if you're reading that, how do you separate that from a kid who is actually in crisis and is actually in distress versus a kid who is just kind of in the moment experiencing big emotions, which is part of being an adolescent. So that's where it's helpful sometimes for me to talk to a mental health professional to just even check in about like, how worried should I be about X or Y, and kind of just get like gauge. Because I will say like, I am a really anxious parent. And so for me, it's a conscious choice not to have too much information, because that's my tendency in general. I keep the grading apps also turned off on my main device, and I only check them on the computer. Like I don't check them on the phone. I think for a lot of parents, that's really helpful to not have too easy access to checking your kids' grades. Because once you start kind of getting hooked on checking them all the time, it gets easy to worry about little things. And it's also, it can really undermine the relationship between kids and their teachers if the parents are, reaching out to the teacher, and it's just too much. A lot of teachers feel really frustrated by those apps as well.
I think even knowing all this, it's like on top of that now there's growing research about kind of the mental health crisis with teens and the role that phones, internet, social media is playing in all of that. I mean, my friends, it seems like, again, I'm 40, my oldest is 11. I feel like my friends are starting to say, like, we should push off the phone, even if it's useful, like, let's just not give them a phone, or let's not let them have social media. Like, we're constantly kind of checking in about this, but where should we be going? It's like the loaded question. Where should we be going with this? Like, is the answer push it off as long as possible? I know, some of the answer is this mentoring and talking about it, and I think we've been doing that, but it also just feels like, gosh, we know this is so bad. Is there some kind of middle ground between, throwing them, I think, kind of into, it almost feels like the dark ages, like, well, you don't get a phone and that's just your mom, sorry, right? And I mean, I've said that, like, we just are not doing that.
I think delay makes sense in some cases. I mean, certainly think when we talk about the single digit ages of kids and they've got watches and then their parents are texting them on the watches during the day, I think for a lot of kids that may be adding stress. For some families, maybe families with two households or families with complex after school, sort of care needs, it may be necessary. And so I think every family is really different, but I certainly think we can limit, if we do get kids a device in those single digit or early double digit years, we can certainly limit the contacts they have on that device. It could just be for contacting caregivers, for example. The reality is there's going to be mission creep, though, because most of these devices do so many things. And so the second you have a watch or even a simple phone, it's going to be, a gaming device. It's going to have the internet, unless there are some sort of baby phones in a way that are like starter phones that don't have the internet, which is, kind of handy if you want your kid just to be able to text. And those are probably a better solution for today's kids than flip phones, which a lot of people think about. But the reality is kids who've grown up on touch screens can't stand flip phones, not just the look of it, which is very retro, but even just having to type a letter multiple times to get to the, they're just like, what? Oh my God. I tried to get my kid to use a flip phone a few years ago, and he was just like, this is the worst technology ever. And I was like, it's not the worst, but I do see how cumbersome it is if you grew up with an iPad in your hand, right? Like, it's going to feel pretty bad, pretty poorly designed. So I think delay is only one strategy, though. I think delay coupled with mentorship and recognizing that if your kid is on Minecraft on a desktop in your basement, or your kid is on Roblox or Fortnite with all their friends, they're already in it.
Yeah.
And that conversation could be happening. Like, they could be talking during the game on Discord, which is really technically, I think, 12 or 13 and up. But like many kids are using that younger. They could be talking on Google Hangouts. And the Google Hangout conversation is as good as it is. Like, if you're with people who are not nice, then it might not be nice. So, I mean, most of these technologies are neutral, the technology itself. I mean, you can argue that the design features like the like button and other things really get us where we're the most human and we're the most vulnerable. But a lot of it is really neutral. Like, a Google Hangout is neutral until somebody tells you a terrible thing on your Google Hangout. Right. And then suddenly it's not so neutral. It's not a neutral experience. Or unless someone, records you without your permission on a Zoom or something else. Like, there's all of these technologies that feel so neutral. The group text, that 5th or 6th or 7th grade group text, can be a toxic stew of terribleness. It can be an innocuous bunch of emojis. It can be very sweet. And it can be, what's the homework? And it can be all of those things in one day. And it probably is all of those things in one day. And so I think that's where we have to decide, how vulnerable is my kid from being out of it and into it? And then your kid is going to be asking him or herself the same question, because sometimes they'll want to get out of a situation, but they also don't want to be talked about. So they will be like, oh, this 7th grade group text is horrendous, but I also don't want to leave. And that's where, in some ways, you could argue that parents might be doing the kid a favor if they're, if you're not in that deep end until maybe junior high age. But I think you're right, too, that kids are going to be more compliant with adult expectations around the ways they use tech at a younger age. That's why as much as I completely respect the folks who do wait until 8th, and I like have talked to some of them, I think they're nice, thoughtful people. And in some ways I agree, like it would be nice if people waited. I also think 8th grade is the nadir of judgment in most people's lives. 8th grade is when I did the things I regret the most and said the things I regret. Like I cannot think of a worst year for more people that's like universally. I mean, you could be like the nicest person in the world and you probably said something horrible in 8th grade. So I'm like, okay, so we're going to wait until 8th and then give them the phones. Like that's going to be great. Like in some ways, and again, this is not me arguing for giving a phone to your 5th or 6th grader, but in some ways, you want a kid who's going to do it the way you want them to do it. Like that's the age where I say they have it an hour a day and you're like, these are the rules. Like they're going to be pretty compliant at that age.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of like not wrong, not right answers. And we all know it's complicated and we just can't seem to figure it out, which leads me to my incredibly loaded question, which is if you could wave your magic wand and make, you know, like your ideal sort of teen parent social media scenario, this is what we're doing. Does it look like the elimination of social media? Does it look like implementing education programs? Are you going to restrict access to social media? Like these are all tools we've seen. What would you put in place?
And that's a great question. I mean, I do think design-wise, I would love to see the companies that are profiting so much, you know, your TikToks and your Metas and your other big companies, do more to respond to reported harassment, you know, things like, at the worst, like sextortion of kids or any kind of threat, bullying, impersonation accounts. I'd like to see them be much more responsive and helpful to families and kids experiencing that kind of thing. And I'd like to see more protections. You know, a lot of teenage girls reported just gross sexual harassment on their apps. And when I see teenage girls, I'm talking kids as young as your kid, like 11, 12, they're getting on Instagram and like the first message they get is like a sugar daddy DM, you know, for a 6th or 7th grader. Not that it would be okay for a high school student or a college student, but they might be a little bit more equipped to deal with that. But, you know, you're getting these very young kids getting these very gross messages. And by the time I talk to them at like 15 or 16, for most of the girls I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, there's the gross DMs that you get if you're on these apps. And they're just accepting that as like part of the just price of being online. So I think that there needs to be more protections and more ways of reporting and blocking that really work. Because I mean, I know like I find the same things come back up, or I was impersonated for a bit on Twitter and it was a whole mess. And like, they really did nothing to help me. It really took, you know, having a bunch of helpful friends that kind of fixed it. So I think it's really important that the companies are responsible. I do think schools ideally would be doing much more on media literacy, on helping kids understand news, on helping kids evaluate sources, on understanding the sort of performative nature of social media so that it's less pernicious for sharing and comparison, for body image. And again, ideally, the worst kinds of content, anything that promotes eating disorders or self-harm, would be removed. Because it's so dangerous. And I think that gets really tricky. I mean, I'm someone who also, you know, believes in and have friends who work with like the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I'm like fighting with myself as someone who like my first job was in a library and I'm all about free speech and I want a free and open internet. And I don't want your 11-year-old or my 14-year-old to get how to self-harm, how to, you know, hide disordered eating from your parents. You know, how to buy illegal drugs without your parents knowing, get them delivered to your house on Snapchat. Like none of those things are good, right? Like we don't want those things. But I love social media as a space for neurodiverse kids to connect and for queer kids to connect and for kids to find affinity in on their interests, you know, whatever their interests may be, whether it's crafting or anime or there's so much that's positive, you know, activism. And we see tremendous teenage activism happening and people connecting and being recognized and frankly being recognized in a way that they probably wouldn't if social media didn't exist, right? And having a different way to speak truth to power than if social media didn't exist. So the fact that social media gives everyone a platform is, you know, good and bad, right? So it's really, it's a lot to manage. So I guess I don't have a perfect design answer, but I do think that it would be amazing if parents could do a really good job helping their kids navigate sleep, helping kids navigate problematic content. And if kids had more choices about reporting, if they're being harassed, maybe they can't go to their parents, maybe they're not out to their parents. In a case of a kid who's transgender, a kid who's has something going on or a part of their identity, an aspect of their identity that their family isn't aware of, but they're being harassed about that part of their identity, there should be ways to report that are effective. But right now, you really need an adult advocate to effectively deal with a lot of situations online. And so we want to be those people for our kids. And that's why we don't want to be so punitive. And it's kind of, we don't want to tell them like, oh my gosh, if you ever send a nude, like I'm going to be so upset and disappointed. You want to say like, that's probably not a very safe way to express your sexuality. It's also like illegal in X state, which is illegal in just basically every state for minors to do it. But also, if you're in a jam or you're one of your friends is like an underwear picture circulating, I will help you.
Yes.
And Aunt Cindy, the lawyer, will help you. Like, we will be all over that. Like, yeah, because nobody gets to harass or, threaten you.
Even if you made a mistake. Yeah,
right. Even if you did something that is considered, unwise or even illegal, like, especially if someone's threatening you or harassing you, they are the wrongest. You are not the wrongest.
Right.
Every teenager did something silly when they have a crush,
that's like the poster for the teenage years, right? Like made a bunch of mistakes now in hopes I learned from them.
Totally. And you will. And we shouldn't create a kind of high stakes world. That's why when kids do make mistakes, ideally, we as adults aren't recirculating them, even if it makes us feel sort of righteous or we can't believe that a kid in our community said X or Y. We don't want to amplify the harm the kid caused by saying the terrible thing. And you never know what video or photo might be out there of your kid. Like you hope and pray and think they would never, she would never, he would never. You don't know.
That's right.
And it only takes once.
You just heard an interview with Devorah Haitner, author of Growing Up in Public. We'll put links to her work in the episode notes. And that's our show. Please subscribe, leave a rating and review, and tell your friends. If you have a question for us or a topic you want us to address, please email us at momanddad@slate.com. This episode of Mom and Dad Are Fighting is produced by Rosemary Belson and Maura Currie. Shasha Leonard is the voice of our listeners. Alicia Montgomery is VP of Slate Audio. For Zak Rosen and Jamilah Lemieux, I'm Elizabeth Newcamp. Thanks for listening.